Hey everybody, it's Ty from K2 Data Science and Engineering. In this video, we're going to use Python to scrape one of the blog articles. One thing you always want to do when writing code is to start with the most basic element of your project. Keep the complexity low at the beginning and then ramp up as you get more comfortable. Here is the workflow we'll follow with scraping. So we'll start by scraping and parsing a single article. Here we'll have to extract the text from the various HTML elements. Once we've done that, we'll move on to scraping all the articles in a category. Here we'll have to deal with pagination. Last but not least, we'll want to scrape all categories in the entire blog. So let's hop into the code. To demonstrate the code, we're actually going to be using a Jupyter notebook. Normally you would actually just use Python script files for a project like this, but I find it's easier to show and store the variables in a tutorial. So what I'm going to do is walk through the code line by line and explain what's going on, and no need to type along. This notebook and all the source files will be linked below in a public GitHub repo, so you can just download that and use it. So the first block of code is actually merely to change the display of the Jupyter notebook, and what it does is it temporarily expands the view. So instead of permanently changing any settings, because the Jupyter notebook is kind of banded in a container, and this is merely to make it easier to show what's going on. You don't actually need to do this on your computer. So see how it just expands, and that's just helpful to read. Now starting with the next cell, these are the imports we'll be using in this notebook. So the first import requests allows us to use HTTP GET and POST requests. The next package is called Beautifulsoup that allows us to parse HTML documents. Next package is dateutil. This is useful for parsing date strings. So if we have the date as a text string and we want to convert it to a datetime object and extract out, say, the month or the day or the year. And the last package is called textstat, and we'll use this later when we're computing analytics. This allows us to get like reading levels of a blog article. So there's a couple of different metrics. We won't really talk about the specifics, but basically they kind of count how many words there are per sentence or how many consonants there are, and it comes up with a reading level. Like, say this article has a reading level targeting people in grade 7 or grade 8 or grade 9, and so we'll be just using that to compute a basic metric for each article. In the next cell, we define a headers dictionary, and what this does is we'll basically use this header for all of our requests. And the reason we need this is because if we just send a GET request from our Jupyter notebook without any headers, it comes out looking exactly like a bot would. And so this header gives it essentially a profile. It tells it, oh, it's coming from a web browser like Firefox or Chrome, and then it's coming from google.com. So a lot of web servers will reject requests that don't have at least a minimum set of headers because they know it's a bot or an automated program that's trying to scrape their website. So this is one way to get around that. So I'm just going to run the two cells. And let's get started with scraping one article. So we'll start with this URL variable, and we can just take a look at what that is. This is a recent article on Frame.io's blog about gender and genre and women in the field. So we can take a look at it. And so we'll be scraping this blog article. So on the first line, we're just defining a URL variable that has the link to that article. And then on the next line, we're creating a request using that URL and then the headers we've already defined. So once we return that request, we can access certain parts of that. So we can check the status code. So status code lets you know if it was able to hit the server and return. So 200 is a success. There are other status codes that represent rejections. So like a 404 or 500. Now in the next line, we're going to extract out the text from the request object. So what we do here is we extract the text and then we do the strip command. So the strip command is a string method, and what that does is it removes any trailing or leading characters, white space characters. So if we run that line of code and print out, you can see we get all the HTML. It's going to be really long because there's tons of scripts and things like that. But here you can see we're starting to get to the content. Here's the title. And then here we're getting the body of text in different paragraph tags. And so this is the raw HTML. So there's not much you can do with just the raw HTML. So on the next line, we're going to bring in the Beautifulsoup package. And what we're going to do is feed in this HTML variable, which is just the text from our request. And we're going to use the XLXML parser. So it's going to parse the HTML and break it up into different components. And so we're going to store it in a soup variable. And the soup variable is actually a specific type. It's a Beautifulsoup class. And so this class has different methods on it that we'll be using in the following lines. Essentially what it will let us do is search for different classes and IDs. So different CSS classes and IDs, and we can find different lists or different images. And that's why we basically use the Beautifulsoup package. So if we go to our blog, what we want to do is essentially break up our code into two sections. What we're going to do is extract out the header and then get each of these items out. So we want to get the category, the time to read, the date, the title, and the author, and then we'll break out the body of the article, and then we'll extract out information about the article, like how many words there were, or how many sentences, or how many images. So in order to get started, what you want to do is inspect the header. So we have this header, and what we want to do is actually get out this div. So it's div class entry header right here. And so that is the container that really contains all the information we want about our header. And once we get that, then we can get like the title, the category, the author's name. So to do that, we can run a method on our soup object. So we're going to do soup.find, and then we're going to search for the class entry header. And one thing to note here, class is a protected word in Python. So usually whenever you use it, it usually has an underscore after it or before it whenever you're using it inside a function. So if we get our header, then the next thing we can do is find our title. So once we get our header, then on our header we can do find class post meta title, and that's exactly post meta title. So this is that h1 here. So if we get that, then we'll get this h1, and then we can extract out the contents of this. Now you'll see there's a ton of space in between here. See, there's a apostrophe, and then there's all this white space and the text and all this white space and closing quotes. So we'll have to remove that. So here again we get the header, and then we get the HTML for the title, and so we can print that out. And this is the exact same HTML we just looked at on the blog article. So we get this, and then the text, and then the opening, and you can see the opening and closing tags. So another method on Beautifulsoup objects is .contents, and what .contents does is it converts the interior contents of the HTML tag to a list of elements. So if you only have one element within it, then it will just give you a list with one element, but there could be multiple elements, so then it would give you a couple strings in that list. And so when we print this out, you can see that our main text is the title we want, but then it has all these other things, and these are tabs and other spaces that are in the white space of the HTML. So this is just how it's outputted out from the database or presented on the HTML view layer. I'm not sure why it is like that. You normally don't have to do that. If you don't want to, you can just remove all the space. For example, here in the title, there's no space, but for whatever reason, that's outputted. And so our job will be to remove that, because we don't want to store that or keep track of that. So what we want to do is we can take that title, we can take the title HTML, we can extract out the contents, and we'll just extract out the first element because there's only going to be one element. So we'll use 0 index, and then we'll do strip. So strip we used before, that removes all trailing and leading, like white spaces and empty characters in a sense. So if we do that, we can store it in this title string variable, and we can just print it out. So here we get on gender and genre, a woman's experience, cutting action blockbusters. So that's really just the most basic scraping workflow component, right? We started with the whole HTML document, then we found the container we needed, then we found the specific HTML element that we needed, and we extracted out the contents, and then we cleaned it up so it's a human readable string, if you will. Now, in order to extract out the other elements, you basically just repeat the process that we did. So what we'll want to do is extract out the author, the category, the minutes, and then do the same thing on the body of the article and extract out what we want to examine. So I'll just show how to extract out the author. So here we just take the header that we had, then we find the class author name, and then what we can do is find the link in that HTML, and then extract out the contents, and then strip out the leading and trailing white spaces. So you can see, we can take a look at the HTML. Yeah, so here we get the paragraph tag, author name, and then the problem with this is there's a nested HTML element, which is a link to all the articles by this author. So once we select author name, we have to do another step where we find the link underneath the paragraph tag, and then we extract out the contents and then remove the white spaces. So you can see that here where we have the author name block, and then we have to find the link under it, and then the contents and strip. And so the rest of the HTML elements that we want would be the same. We'd have to check whether it's nested, how to extract it, and to strip it if it had any excess. So I'm not going to show the code line by line on how to do that. I'm just going to walk through a larger block that breaks it down. So this next part of code will seem like a lot if you haven't looked at a lot of Python code before, but it's very simple. It's just building on what we already looked at. And what I'm going to do here is modularize the code into functions that we can just pass between each other, and then we will be extracting a lot more variables. So if you want to take look at this block, so this is essentially the function we'll want to examine. It's called parse page. And what we're going to do is simply just feed in a URL as the main variable, and then just run through the same code we did, do a request, get the HTML, convert it to a Beautifulsoup object, And then we'll have a section for our header content and then our body content. And what we're going to do is we'll extract out the header, and then we'll get the reading time out as a variable. And what we're going to do is feed in the header Beautifulsoup object, and then we're going to run these helper functions. So extract read time, and then for the title, we're going to do extract title. For the author, we're going to do extract author. For the categories, we'll do extract categories. Now, all those functions are simply defined below, right here: extract read time, extract title, date, author, categories. And you can go through the logic and see. So categories is a bit different than what we did before, because there could be multiple categories. An article could be under color correction and editing and post-processing, so there could be 2 or 3 categories. In most cases there's only 1, but that's something you run into, or that's something that you should kind of identify while browsing the blog manually. So you have that, and then we have the date, so we actually extract the date and then we parse it to get the month and the weekday. And then on the next block we look at the body content. So here we simply just get the block entry content, and that's really just the block containing everything here. So you can see it's defined as entry content, but that is basically contains all the body. And then what we'll do is we'll get a word count. So we're just going to take the length of the text, and then we'll get the reading level, and this is where we use the text stat package. We're going to count all the links, and then we're also going to count all the images. We'll store all those variables in a dictionary called page data, and then we'll return it. And that really is just taking what we did before and just modularizing it into a set of functions. So it's recomposable, and we can just call these functions on one page if we wanted. So we can actually just run that if we want. So this is the dictionary for the Women's Experience blog article. And you can see here we have reading time, title, date, month, weekday, author, categories, word count, reading level, link count, and image count. So that is it for this video. We just wanted to cover how to extract out the articles, or extract out the content from one article. And then in the next video, what we'll want to do is basically extract the content from all the articles in one category.